Hi everybody, thank you so much for joining me in a virtual book launch for Me and Mama. Me and Mama is a book that I both wrote and illustrated. My name is Cozbi Cabrera. Special shout out to Amy Alsnair, who urged me to join SCBWI. Little did I know that I would find a community so warm and welcoming, so vibrant and extremely talented. So thank you to each of you. And my prayer is that you remain safe. I know a lot of us have children returning to school from home, and that we are all finding our way, and even as creatives, reimagining how we move forward in this world as we know it at this moment. A little bit about myself. As I said, my name is Cozbi. I was born, raised, and lived in Brooklyn up until 3 years ago when I moved to Evanston, Illinois with my family. I am one of 4 children born to parents that are from Honduras, Central America. And so my siblings and I are first generation here. And I'm trained as an art director. I did music packaging for a number of years for Atlantic Records and Sony Music. And while I was at Atlantic Records, a dear college friend of mine, Laura Pegram, who has an amazing literary journal called Quayle, which is a tremendous resource for writers of color, invited me to illustrate 2 books that she was having published by a small independent publisher. And so I submitted my sketches, got them approved, started painting, delivered the paintings, and you can imagine I was using oil paint, which is in fact my preferred medium, but these paints would not dry because oil dries when it wants to, not when you want it to. So I found a toxic little solution in desperation called Krylon, and I sprayed it over the surface so that it would be dry enough that I could in fact pack and ship and make my deadline. So years went on. I moved on to Sony Music as design director, and I started to develop these handmade dolls that I was making out of linens and tissue linens, and it was very much a labor of love, but I felt because I was applying so many painstaking details that if I gave it more time, I could do better with it. And so I wound up leaving my career path at Sony Music and making these handmade dolls. And while I was showing the dolls in a show in New York, an editor from Green Willow Books happened by and declared that she was very much touched and moved by the work, said a few words, and the next business day there was a FedEx envelope at my door, and in it was a manuscript and a request. She said, I know this is a very perhaps unusual request, but my thought is your work would make such a good pairing for this particular author if you would consider illustrating her manuscript. I did. I submitted my sketches and my paintings, this time in acrylics, so it dried very, very quickly. And I could tell that she and her art director were a little surprised because they thought that I would deliver it, in fact, deliver it as textile art. So years went by, and I continued with the dolls, and I opened up a shop in Brooklyn over a period of 10 years, 2 different locations. I literally, with a really dynamic team that I created, hand-built all of the garments in the shop, and all of them were custom tailored with wonderful details like welted pockets and amazing shoulder lines, and the list goes on. And I would get the occasional request that I illustrated a manuscript here and there. So it was Patricia McKissick's Stitching and Pulling a G-Spun Quilt, another quilt story about an underground railroad called Most Loved in All the World, published by Houghton Mifflin, And so the list went on over time. And I remember once delivering some work to Random House, and the editor there asked me, Cozbi, do you have any stories? And I thought, stories? How could she know to ask me if I had stories? You see, I'd been a secret writer all of my life, and so I had bins upon bins of writing material that was in the basement that nobody knew about except my husband, of whom I'd been married to for quite some time. And so I submitted something to her, didn't hear back, and it wasn't until years later that she contacted me and said, "You remember that's one of the stories that you submitted to me? I think it was called My Hair is a Garden. I mentioned it to the folks at Albert Whitman, and they seemed very interested, so you might be hearing from them." And sure enough, Albert Whitman did contact me, and so that was the first book that I both wrote and illustrated in 2018, called My Hair is a Garden. And so that brings us to today. Me and Mama, I want to thank you for taking a little bit of time to hear these ramblings, and I do insist that this not be a one-way conversation. I would love to hear from you, to hear what you're up to and what you're doing. You can always contact me at cozbi.a.cabrera@gmail.com. And now I'd love to share with you a little bit of the inspiration and motivation for writing Me and Mama. Me and Mama, an ode to the everyday. The everyday, a string of moments from good morning to you, good morning to you, to good night. It started with a cup, my favorite cup of all time, and my 3-year-old was trying to get me a glass of water, unsolicited. It was at that precise moment that I recognized that joy sits squarely on the shoulders of equanimity. Early on, I saw it as a simple book with very sparse language. We would trace this tenderness between mother and daughter through their everyday objects. In the same way an anthropologist might surmise a number of things about a people by rummaging through their objects and everything of theirs that was tethered to utility. I would show very little of this mother and daughter, few suggestions, half hints, maybe a spread or two. But for the most part, the challenge was to let the story in and allow the reader to fill in the gaps and bring shape to the text. After revising, the question of to show or not to show became, where will this go? And it was now about the string of moments where time is irrelevant and the soul is being nourished, watered, and fed. It's that adage about the days are long and the years are short.
And there's time to play.
And when we have no idea what we're doing, and we're allowed the space to do some things imperfectly.
Until we get it. When it's raining, we find the fun.
And something like getting into the shower, a potential friction point, reminds us of that rain. And we get to compare and contrast because that's how we sort and connect our dots. Observe and say or think this to that.
Not this, but that.
And the dark, the thing we fear and from which we hide,
is waiting for us.
So we can get to the rich stuff, those places we get to process and replay, and even conjure up reminders of who we love and who loves us and how we share those string of moments from good morning to
good night.
Peekaboo! Thank you.